We stand by our own. The words carried weight as 200 leather-clad bikers filled every corner of the rundown diner owned by Clara. Just 24 hours earlier, she had stood up for a lone member of the Iron Reapers when local police began hassling him. What happened afterward would bring an entire town to tears. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stories for You. Let's dive in. Clara Jensen's hands were cracked and raw as she wiped down the sticky countertop at Jensen's diner for the third time that hour. The lunch rush, if one could call 8 customers a rush, had passed, and she was mentally calculating whether today's earnings would be enough to pay the electric bill still unopened in her purse. The words final notice had already bled through the envelope. Just a few more months, she muttered, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. It was the same empty reassurance she'd been giving herself for 18 months, ever since her father's massive stroke had put him in a care home and left her responsible for the family diner. Her nursing career in the city, her apartment, her entire life, all put on hold for a roadside diner that was losing money faster than she could patch the holes. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily above her, barely stirring the muggy summer air. Outside, the main street of Elmsworth was as quiet as it had been lately, ever since the factory ended the night shift. The bank had foreclosed on 3 businesses already that year. Some days Clara wondered if Jensen's diner would be next. The bell above the door chimed, that cheerful little sound her father had always loved, and Clara glanced up. Her stomach tightened at once. A towering man in worn leather stepped through the doorway. His weathered face was half shielded by a wild gray beard that looked like it had collected dust from 1,000 roads. Faded tattoos climbed his thick forearms like illustrated tales of a rough life, disappearing beneath rolled-up sleeves. But it was the emblem on his vest that brought the entire room to a standstill. The unmistakable skull insignia of the Iron Reapers. Reapers. The few customers still seated froze in place. Elderly Mrs. Whitaker even reached for her pearls. The Turner twins stopped chewing, their forks suspended midair. Even the radio seemed to stutter into a brief burst of static. The biker clearly sensed the tension. His broad shoulders dipped slightly as he walked toward the counter. Each step of his heavy boots landed on the cracked linoleum with the weight of a hammer strike. He deliberately picked the stool farthest from everyone else, putting space between himself and the others. The choice of someone well acquainted with being unwelcome. Clara could almost hear her father's voice echoing in her mind. Every dollar's the same at Jensen's, but her father had never had to serve an Iron Reaper in this tightly wound, conservative town, where stories about the motorcycle club spread like scripture. Clara steadied her grip, reached for a foggy plastic menu and a glass of ice water. The other waitress, Brooke, had suddenly discovered an urgent reason to restock the ketchup bottles on the opposite end of the diner. "Thanks for stopping by Jensen's," Clara said as she approached the biker, wearing the same rehearsed smile she offered to every guest. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes, fresh out of the kitchen this morning." The biker looked up, and Clara was caught off guard by his eyes. Pale blue, bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. Framed by a face carved by time and leather lined from the road, his eyes looked like they belonged to a different man entirely. "Coffee," he said. His voice was unexpectedly gentle, almost tender. "Black as it gets, and whatever's quickest from the back. Been riding since before the sun came up." As Clara poured his coffee from the battered old percolator, she noticed his hands, large, hardened hands that seemed made for destruction. But there was a slight tremor in them as he reached for the mug. His knuckles were raw, and just beneath the edge of his cuff, she spotted a hospital bracelet peeking out. Behind the wariness in his expression, Clara saw something else, a sorrow that went all the way to the bone. It was a look she had seen many times during her clinical rotations in oncology, the gaze of someone who kept watch through long nights. "Still a long road ahead?" she asked, keeping her tone light, the way her father used to talk to strangers. His hands, rough and immense, wrapped around the mug like it held something sacred, pulling warmth from the chipped ceramic. He took a long sip before replying. "Heading back to Ridgeway Medical Center," he said finally. Each word came slow, as if they weighed him down. "My daughter." Something caught in his throat. He stared into his coffee, his fingers clenching around the mug. "My daughter," he repeated, but the rest of the sentence never came. Something inside Clara shifted. It wasn't pity. He didn't seem like someone who'd accept that, but rather a familiar sting of shared humanity. In that moment, he wasn't a reaper. He was just a father, scared and tired. "I'll get your order started right away," she said, her tone softening. "How about toast and eggs? Fastest thing on the menu. Shouldn't take more than 6 minutes." He gave a small nod, the tension in his shoulders easing visibly, slightly. Maybe it was the comfort of a meal on the way, or maybe it was simply because she hadn't pressed him for more. As Clara turned to submit the order, she felt the eyes of every remaining diner fixed on her. Mrs. Whitaker was murmuring urgently to Mrs. Collins, their silver heads tilted together like scheming politicians. The Turner twins were outright glaring. Brooks still hadn't finished organizing those ketchup bottles on the far end of the counter. Towns like Elmsworth had memories that ran deep, and the Iron Reapers carried a reputation that reached them long before their engines did. 2 decades ago, a band of bikers had blasted through town, leaving shattered windows at Darby's Market after a heated argument. It didn't matter that no one knew whether they were Reapers or another gang. In Elmsworth's collective conscience, every biker bore the same guilt. The doorbell chimed again, and two of Elmsworth's police officers stepped inside. Officer Darrell and Officer Reese. They were familiar faces, usually polite, though Clara had always found Darrell's smug attitude hard to stomach. Their eyes landed on the biker instantly, and Clara watched Darrell elbow Reese. The two men made their way to the counter, taking stools on either side of the visitor with unmistakable intent. "Well, well," Darrell said loudly, leaving no doubt about his disdain. "Not every day someone like you shows up in Elmsworth. Just passing through, right?" The biker didn't look up. "Just here for a bite, officer." Clara returned with a plate of toast and scrambled eggs, placing it carefully in front of him. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. But before he could reply, Darrell cut in. "How about seeing some ID, Clara? Might be one of those Reapers we've been warned about." The biker slowly reached for his wallet, but Darrell's hand moved toward his holster. "Nice and slow." Clara felt her blood rise. "He's a paying customer, Darrell. No different than anyone else." "Not like me," Darrell sneered. "Guys like him bring trouble, drugs, violence. My kind." The biker finally looked up, his voice still measured but with a sharp undertone. "You don't know a thing about me, officer." Darrell leaned in, eyes narrowing. "I know that patch. I know what it stands for." The biker opened his mouth to respond, but Reese interrupted. "Maybe we should run your plates, just to be sure." By now, several patrons had turned to watch, some nodding in agreement, others shifting awkwardly in their seats. The biker lowered his fork to the plate. "I'm just trying to get something to eat before heading back to Ridgeway Hospital. My daughter," his voice wavered, "she's not doing well." "Oh, right," Darrell scoffed. The classic sick family member story. Haven't heard that one before." Something in Clara broke. Maybe it was the image of her father hooked to machines. Or maybe it was just the simple kindness her parents had instilled in her. Whatever it was, it rose like fire in her chest. "That's enough," she said, her voice cutting clean through the charged silence. "You're done bullying my customers, Darrell." He'd left him unable to speak. "But I couldn't just sit back and do nothing." Her father's eyes, though distant, seemed to hold something. Maybe agreement, or maybe that was just what she needed to believe. The following morning, Clara showed up early, just like always. What wasn't routine, however, was the sheet of paper taped to the glass of her front door. In bold letters it read, "Closed until further notice," and scrawled beneath it in thick red marker, "No biker lovers in Elmsworth." Clara tore it down with trembling fingers, anger rising in her chest. Nothing inside seemed out of place, but the message had landed, loud and clear. The usual breakfast crowd was noticeably thinner than normal. By midday, the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. The chatter that typically filled Jensen's diner was gone, replaced by a hushed quiet and only a handful of loyal regulars who had dared to show up despite the silent warning circling town. Mrs. Collins came in for her routine tuna melt and gave Clara's hand a gentle pat. "Don't let this get to you, dear. People around here forget things quickly. When they want to." Ethan Moore and his wife came too, settling into the front booth, clearly in full view of anyone passing by. "Screw 'em," Ethan said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. Still the best damn pancakes in the county. But small acts of support didn't pay the rent. Clara ran the numbers in her head. Another week like this, and she'd be in trouble. Around 2 o'clock, with the place completely empty, Clara leaned against the counter and let herself exhale. The diner wasn't just a job, it was her father's legacy. The place where she'd learned to pour coffee and clean tables as a kid. Now it was on the verge of vanishing, because she had stood up for someone nobody else would. The bell over the door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. Clara quickly wiped her eyes and put on her practiced smile. A man around 50 stood at the threshold, wearing worn jeans and a plain navy t-shirt. The only sign of connection to any group was a small Iron Reaper's pin on his leather vest. At his side was a woman, his age, her silver hair tied neatly behind her head. "Clara Jensen?" the man asked. She nodded, a little cautious. "I'm David Mercer, Jax's brother." He stepped forward, offering his hand. "This is my wife, Helen." Clara shook both their hands, confused. "Jax told us what happened yesterday," Helen said kindly. "He wanted to come himself, but he's still at the hospital with his daughter Rena." "How is she?" Clara asked gently. David's expression darkened. "It's still touch and go. Stage 4 cancer. They've started a last hope treatment at Ridgeway Medical. No guarantees, but it's something." "I'm so sorry," Clara said, her heart sinking. "He said you were kind when it counted," Helen continued. "Said you stood up for him when nobody else did." Clara gave a small shrug. "I just did what anyone should have." David shook his head. "Number most wouldn't. And from the look of things," he glanced around the nearly empty diner, "you're paying the price for it." Clara didn't argue. The silence in the room spoke for itself. "We wanted to show our thanks properly," Helen said, reaching into her purse. "Jax mentioned your father's been unwell." "I'm not looking for money," Clara replied quickly, her pride kicking in. "We're not offering that," David said with a soft smile. "But maybe we can send some people your way." Before she could respond, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines began to echo down the street. Not one or two, dozens. Clara moved to the window in disbelief as motorcycles lined both sides of the street, then packed the small lot out front, even spilling into the old hardware store's lot next door. There had to be over 100, maybe 2. They came from every direction, riders of every age. Leather jackets, denim, patches, some wore Iron Reaper's insignias, others bore simple messages of support. "What? What's happening?" Clara whispered, her voice barely above the growing thunder outside. David smiled. "Jax reached out to the local chapters last night, told them about what you did. Word gets around in our community. Fast. Last I checked," Helen added, "there were 212 riders confirmed, and they've all been riding since before dawn. I'd say they're hungry." Past few days finally burst like a dam within her. The laugh that escaped carried tears, release, disbelief, and something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Hope. "I think I'll be all right," she said, brushing her eyes with the back of her hand. Jax stepped forward and clasped both of her hands in his. "You didn't just help me today, Clara. You reminded a lot of people what real loyalty actually looks like." From the booths around them, chatter picked up again. Laughter echoed softly. The familiar aroma of fresh brewed coffee and bacon sizzling on the griddle drifted through the air like a long-lost comfort. The kitchen was alive again. Brooke, still a bit stunned but smiling, darted between tables, trying to keep up with the flood of orders. Outside, the street was still packed with motorcycles and people, but no one complained. No honking, no shouting. A few townsfolk wandered in casually, pretending it was all coincidence. Even Mrs. Whitaker came by around 4, clutching her handbag tightly and asking for her usual slice of cherry pie, as if the last 24 hours had never happened. The boycott hadn't simply fizzled out. It had been completely drowned in the thunder of engines and buried beneath the weight of unexpected decency. Later that night, long after the final motorcycle had rumbled away and the sun had sunk beneath the outline of Elmsworth's rooftops, Clara sat quietly beside her father's bed once again. His eyes were shut, his breathing gentle and slow. "I think we're going to be okay, Dad," she whispered into the stillness. "Your place, our place, It still means something, even to people from far outside this town. That's got to count for something. She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap, a small smile curving her lips as her gaze lifted to the dim, flickering ceiling light, the same one that had watched over them for so many years. Outside, Elmsworth lay under a peaceful blanket of stars. But inside that little diner, something greater than breakfast had been served. Not just meals, but bravery, dignity, and a reminder that sometimes the very people we're taught to fear are the ones who stand tallest when it matters most. And somewhere in that soft, sacred quiet, Clara could almost feel her father smiling too. Day had finally turned. "I think I can fit them in," Clara said. For the next several hours, Clara and the two teenage girls she managed to call in worked harder than they ever had. The supply truck arrived right on schedule, stocked with enough ingredients to feed a battalion of hungry riders. Every seat was taken, and as customers rotated in and out, the flow never stopped. The till grew so full it had to be emptied twice. Word traveled fast through Elmsworth, and gradually, with hesitation, some of the regulars began to reappear. They lingered at the door at first, clearly uneasy at the rows of leather jackets and tattooed arms. But the bikers shifted over, pulled up chairs, and welcomed them with easy conversation. Mrs. Collins ended up deep in talk with a biker grandmother about their mutual love of needlework. Ethan Moore discovered that one rider was a fellow veteran from his platoon in Vietnam. The high school principal found himself debating education policy with a biker who moonlighted as a community college instructor. By the time the sun began to dip, the entire gathering had transformed into something closer to a block party. Someone set up a portable grill to handle the food overflow. Music poured out of bike speakers. Kids from nearby homes gathered around the chrome machines with wide eyes and curious hands. In a quiet moment, Clara pulled Jax aside. "How's your daughter? Rena, right?" Jax's face lit up. "That's actually why I made it out today. Her doctor called this morning. The treatment, it's working. It's early still, but her numbers are improving." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "It's the first good news we've had in a long time." Without thinking, Clara wrapped her arms around him. After a heartbeat of surprise, he embraced her back. "She wants to meet you," Jax said when they pulled apart. "Says the woman who stood up for her dad sounds a lot like her. Tough, doesn't put up with nonsense." "I'd love that," Clara said, and meant every word. As dusk settled, Marcus stepped into the center of the room and called out for attention. The conversations fell away. The diner hushed. "I want to thank Clara Jensen for opening her doors to us today," he said, his deep voice commanding the room. "And I want everyone in Elmsworth to hear this loud and clear. Jensen's Diner is now under the protection of the Iron Reapers." A round of cheers erupted from the gathered riders. "Which means," Marcus continued, "we'll be stopping by regularly from now on. And if anyone around here decides to make Miss Jensen's life difficult over who she chooses to serve, we'll take it very personally." His gaze shifted toward Officer Reese, who had quietly taken a seat in the back. Reese looked suddenly small, shrinking a little under the weight of Marcus's stare. "Are we understood?" Reese gave a quick nod. "Good," Marcus said, a grin cracking through his hard features. "Now, who's ready for pie? I hear Clara makes the best apple pie in 3 counties." Another cheer broke out, and with it, the hum of conversations returned. That night, long after the last bike had disappeared into the dark, Clara locked up the diner and tallied the receipts. It was more income than she'd seen in 2 whole weeks. But more than that, something had shifted in the air of Elmsworth. She felt it in her bones as she walked to her car. The town that had been ready to turn its back on her had caught a glimpse of something different, a deeper humanity beneath all the leather and ink. As she drove toward the care center to visit her father, a soft smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Standing up for one man had brought her hundreds of allies, and maybe, just maybe, had nudged a small town a little closer to understanding what it truly means to judge someone by their character rather than their clothes. The next morning, Clara arrived at the diner and found a box leaning against the door. Inside was a custom-made leather vest. Across the back, in careful embroidery, it read, "Jensen's Diner," surrounded by the words, "Allies of the Reapers." Pinned to the inside was a note, scribbled in a rough hand. To the bravest diner owner we know, Rena's doing better. She still wants to meet you. Jack's Clara hung the vest on the wall, right beside her father's old apron. When Officer Darrell came in for coffee about an hour later, quieter than usual, almost courteous, Clara served him with the same calm smile she gave to every guest. Her father had always said to measure people by what they did, not by what they wore. And sometimes it took a room full of bikers to remind an entire town just how true that was. Funny how the smallest choices can leave the deepest marks. Clara Jensen hadn't planned to make a stand that day. She simply couldn't look the other way when someone was being treated unfairly. She had no idea that one small act of kindness would bring 200 bikers through her door, preserve her father's legacy, and start healing a town's division. Sometimes real courage doesn't come with a spotlight or a speech. Sometimes it shows up quietly, with a plate of food, a hot cup of coffee, and the willingness to serve someone the world has already written off. One cup at a time.